Didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I just stood there in the break room of Hartwell and Associates, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee I hadn't touched in 20 minutes, reading the same 4 sentences over and over, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated. Please return your keycard to security before end of business today. HR will be in touch regarding your final check. Director of Operations, Hartwell and Associates. The thing about getting fired by email is that there's no one to look at. No face to search for some sign that this is a mistake, that someone typed the wrong name, that there's been some terrible misunderstanding. Just words on a screen. Words sent at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of drafting a client proposal that, by all accounts, was going to close the biggest deal the Pacific Northwest office had seen in 3 years. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I set down the coffee. I read it a fifth time. And then I went back to my desk, closed the proposal document, and started thinking. Let me back up. I had worked at Hartwell and Associates for 6 years. Financial consulting, not glamorous, but I was good at it. I had built relationships with clients that stretched across state lines. I had stayed late when everyone else went home. I had flown to Denver on a Tuesday with 12 hours notice because a client needed someone there in person, and I did it without complaining because that's what you do when you care about your work. In 6 years, I had received 3 performance reviews, all exceptional. The last one had included a note, handwritten, from the founding partner himself, a man named Mr. Bessemans. Hartwell, who had built the firm from a 2-person operation in the 90s into something with 4 offices and over 200 employees. The note said, "You are exactly the kind of person this firm was built for." That was 8 months ago. What changed in 8 months was simple, Mr. Hartwell's son joined the company. His name was Deacon, 29 years old, fresh off a stint at a consulting firm in Chicago that, from what I could gather, had not exactly been broken-hearted to see him go. He came in with the corner office, the title of Director of Operations, and a very specific energy, the kind that walks into a room already certain it's the smartest thing in it. I want to be fair. I tried to be fair. When Deacon called his first all-hands meeting and told us he was going to reimagine the firm's talent architecture, I told myself he was nervous. When he started CCing himself on every email chain I was part of, I told myself he was learning. When he pulled me into his office 3 weeks after he started and said, "I just want to make sure we're aligned on your role going forward," I smiled and nodded and said, "Of course. Absolutely. I'm a team player. I am a team player." I just never expected the team to include someone actively working to sideline me. The truth came out, as truths usually do, through a series of small things I wasn't supposed to notice. A client I had managed for 4 years was quietly reassigned to Deacon's preferred analyst. A guy who had been with the firm for 8 months and couldn't find the Pacific Northwest office on a map when he started. A presentation I had prepared was delivered by Deacon in a meeting I wasn't invited to. My name was removed from a proposal I had written, top to bottom, and replaced with his. I documented everything. That part matters. I kept records, dates, emails, screenshots, notes from conversations. My husband thought I was being paranoid at first. "Maybe he's just figuring out his role," he said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table while I highlighted another discrepancy in another document. My husband is almost never wrong about people. But this was one of those times. The email arrived on a Tuesday, 3 days before my department's biggest quarterly presentation, a presentation I had been preparing for 6 weeks. 3 days before the presentation, I was eliminated. I finished my coffee. It was cold. I walked to security, returned my keycard, and drove home. I sat in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. My husband was working from home that day. He heard the garage door and came to find me in the kitchen, and he took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" I told him. Every word of it. The email. The phrasing. Position eliminated. The timing. The proposal. 6 years. He didn't say anything for a while. He just pulled me close and held on. And then he leaned back and looked at me in that particular way he has, quiet, focused, like he's solving something. And he said, Okay, let me make a few calls. I want to tell you I knew in that moment exactly what was coming. I want to say I had some cinematic flash of insight, some understanding of the whole picture. But the honest truth is I was just tired. I was exhausted and embarrassed, and I didn't fully understand yet what my husband meant by a few calls. What I knew about my husband's work at that point was general. He ran a private equity firm, small by the standards of the industry, but precise, which was his word for it. We're precise, he'd say, which meant they moved carefully, researched thoroughly, and when they moved on something, they were certain. I knew he had been researching something in the Pacific Northwest consulting space for almost a year. I had not, until that afternoon, connected those two facts. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, 14 texts, 3 voicemails. The calls were from numbers I didn't recognize. A number from HR at Hartwell, and 2 calls from Deacon himself. I made coffee. I listened to the voicemails. The HR one was first. A woman I had worked with for years, her voice careful and very professional, saying she wanted to discuss my separation package and could I please call her back at my earliest convenience. The second voicemail was from Deacon. He said, "Hey, this is Deacon Hartwell. I think there may have been we need to talk. Please call me back as soon as possible. This is urgent." The third was from Mr. Hartwell himself. His voice was different than I remembered. When I had met him in person, he was warm, measured, someone who clearly understood the weight of his words. The voice in the voicemail was not that. It was tight. Controlled in the way that people are controlled when they are trying very hard not to fall apart. He said, "I owe you a profound apology. I've only just become aware of what has happened, and I want you to know this does not represent who this firm is or who I am. I would very much like to speak with you. Please call me. Please." I sat with that for a long time. Here's what happened while I was sleeping. My husband's firm had been in quiet conversations for months with a group of investors about acquiring a controlling stake in Hartwell and Associates. The founding partner, Mr. De Hartwell, had been looking to semi-retire, to bring in outside capital to help the firm grow, to step back from day-to-day operations while retaining a minority ownership position. It was the kind of deal that takes a long time to structure, patient work. Precise, my husband would say. The deal had not been announced publicly. It was not common knowledge inside the firm. But it was real and it was close, and it was why, when my husband said he was going to make a few calls, what he meant was that he was calling his attorney and his lead partner, and ultimately Mr. Mina, Hartwell himself, to let him know that the director of operations had terminated, effective immediately, the one employee whose institutional knowledge and client relationships were among the primary reasons the acquisition had been valued the way it was. I did not hear that conversation. My husband told me later it was brief. I called Mr. Hartwell back. He answered on the first ring. What followed was one of the stranger conversations of my life. He apologized. He explained. He said he had not known about the termination until he was made aware by outside parties. He was careful about that phrase, outside parties, and that when he understood the full picture, he had spoken to his son immediately. "And what did your son say?" I asked. A pause. "He said he felt you had been blocking his ability to lead." I thought about the 6 years, the handwritten note, the proposal I had written with my name removed, the client I had managed for 4 years. "I see," I said. "I want to offer you your position back," Mr. Hartwell said, "with a title adjustment and a significant compensation increase." I had thought about this. In the driveway the night before, I had sat and thought about what I would say if this call came. I had imagined different versions of it. In some versions, I said yes. In others, I said things I probably shouldn't say on a recorded line. What I actually said was, "I appreciate the call. I need some time to think." He said he understood. I hung up and sat in my kitchen and drank my coffee, which was, this time, exactly the right temperature. Here's what people don't tell you about being let go from a job you are good at. The anger comes later. The first day you're mostly in shock, moving through the hours on autopilot, performing normal while your brain is still trying to catch up. The second day is when it lands. I woke up at 5 a.m. on Wednesday and lay in the dark and felt it, the full weight of 6 years and an email and position eliminated and the complete absence of a conversation, a warning, a human voice saying your name. My husband was still asleep. I got up quietly and went to the kitchen and stood at the window and looked at the backyard where the light was just starting to change, and I let myself feel it. The humiliation. The fury. The particular kind of grief that comes from being dismissed by people who should have known better. And then I thought, what do I actually want here? Not what I was owed, not what I could prove. What did I want my life to look like in 6 months? In a year? I wanted to work on things I chose. I wanted to stop waiting for someone else to decide my value. I wanted to build something that had my name on it, not as a line item to be edited out of a proposal, but as the actual foundation. My husband found me at the window around 6:30. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He just stood beside me and handed me a mug and waited. "I'm not going back," I said. He nodded, like he'd been waiting for that. "Okay," he said. "Then let's talk about what's next." I called Mr. Hartwell 2 days later. I told him I appreciated his apology. I meant that. I told him I wouldn't be returning to the firm. I also meant that. What I told him next, I had written down first, because I wanted to be precise. I told him that the documentation I had compiled over the previous 4 months, the reassigned clients, the removed attributions, the meetings I had been excluded from, was thorough. I told him I had spoken with an employment attorney. I told him I was not interested in a lawsuit or public conflict. What I was interested in was a fair resolution and enhanced severance package, a letter of recommendation from him personally, and the formal written return of attribution on the 3 proposals that had gone out under someone else's name. He agreed to all of it. He also, toward the end of the call, said something I didn't expect. He said, "I want you to know that I understand now what was happening. My son made decisions based on feeling threatened. That's not an excuse. But I want you to understand that his behavior was not sanctioned." "I know," I said. "I never thought it was you." Another pause. "That means more than you know," he said. The acquisition closed 6 weeks later. Deacon Hartwell's title of Director of Operations was not included in the new organizational structure. This was not something my husband had a direct hand in. He was careful about that, deliberate about keeping the personal and professional separate. But the incoming management team had done their due diligence. They had looked at the last 12 months. They had drawn their own conclusions. I heard through someone who still worked there that Deacon had expected a seat at the table in the new structure, that he had been confident, right up until the announcement, that his position was secure. I don't have a lot of information about what happened to him after that. I've thought about it less than you might expect. When someone takes up that much space in your life and then they're simply gone, there's a strange absence where the anger used to be. Not satisfaction exactly, something quieter. My husband and I took 2 weeks off after everything settled. We drove up the coast, Oregon, a little bit of Washington, and stayed in places with no cell service and cooked our own meals and talked about things that had nothing to do with work. On the last night, we were sitting on the porch of a rental in Cannon Beach, watching the sun go down over the water. And he said, "So what's the plan?" I had been thinking about this for weeks, thinking while hiking, thinking while cooking, thinking in the car with the windows down and the Pacific coming in on the left side. I told him I wanted to start my own practice. Small to begin with, boutique financial consulting, built around the client relationships I had spent 6 years developing. Several of those clients had already reached out to me, unprompted, once word got out that I had left Hartwell. 3 of them had said some version of the same thing. "Wherever you land, we want to work with you." My husband smiled. Not a surprise smile. A "there it is" smile. "You want to be your own boss," he said. "I want to be your own boss," he said. "I want to be precise," I said. He laughed. It echoed off the water. I launched my firm 4 months after the termination email. I named it after the street where I grew up. A small, specific detail that matters only to me, and that's the point. I brought on 2 people I had worked with years before, people I trusted, people who were good and knew it without needing anyone to tell them constantly. In the first year, we signed 11 clients. 3 of them were former Hartwell clients who followed me directly. The revenue was not massive. The work was hard and sometimes disorganized, and I made mistakes I had never made when I had a full firm behind me. And I learned from every single one of them. I did not miss Hartwell and Associates once. There's something about building something from scratch that changes you in a way that being promoted never quite does. When I was at Hartwell, my success always existed inside someone else's structure. Someone else's name was on the building. Someone else signed off on my reviews. Someone else decided whether my work was worth keeping. I was very good at working within that structure. I had mistaken that for freedom. It's not the same thing. Last spring, I ran into someone who had been a senior analyst at Hartwell during my time there. We ended up at the same industry event and got coffee and talked for a while. He updated me on various people, various changes. The firm had done well under new management. Several people I cared about had been promoted. I asked without planning to about Deacon. He said Deacon had gone back to Chicago. He was working at something there. Smaller, he said, more in line with his actual experience level. He said it without any particular judgment, just as information. Good, I said, and I meant it simply, not vengefully. Just, I hoped he found something that fit. Whether he did is not something I'll ever know. Some stories don't give you the ending for every character, and I've made peace with that. The part that's mine ended with the sunrise I watched from Cannon Beach, and the phone call I didn't have to make anymore, and the desk in an office with my name on the door. I still have the email, the original one, sent at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. Your position has been eliminated. I kept it in a folder I look at maybe twice a year. Not to stay angry. Not to remind myself to be careful. I kept it because it was the exact moment everything changed, and I think it's important to remember the specific shape of the door that opened, even when the opening felt, at the time, like something closing. My assistant knocked on my office door this morning and reminded me I had a call in 10 minutes. I said thank you and took a sip of coffee. Hot, this time, and pulled up the client file and got to work. That's the whole story. That's all of it. And honestly, I'm so glad it happened exactly the way it did. I've thought a lot about what Deacon actually believed when he sent that termination notice. I think he genuinely thought he was untouchable. That's the thing about a certain kind of entitlement. It doesn't feel like entitlement from the inside. It feels like clarity, like you're simply seeing the world accurately, and everyone who questions you just doesn't understand yet. He looked at 6 years of my work and saw an obstacle. He looked at my client relationships, my institutional knowledge, my name on proposals, and he saw something that needed to be removed so he could take up more space. And the decision he made, to eliminate me by email, 3 days before a major presentation, without a conversation, without a warning, that decision came from a place of total confidence that it would work, that there would be no consequence, that the story ended there. What I've come to understand is that actions like that don't just affect the person they're aimed at. They reveal something. They create a record. Every email I saved, every date I logged, every meeting I was excluded from, I wasn't building a case out of bitterness. I was just paying attention. And paying attention turned out to matter more than anything else I did in those 6 years. There's something I want to say about that, because I think it gets lost in stories like this one. The outcome didn't happen because the universe corrected itself. It happened because of choices. My husband had spent nearly a year building something careful and precise. I had spent months documenting what was happening to me. Mr. Hartwell had built a firm over decades on a specific set of values, and when he found out those values had been violated, he picked up the phone. None of that was luck. It was people making decisions, consistently, over time, and those decisions accumulating into something. Deacon made decisions too. He chose shortcuts over substance. He chose to put his name on work that wasn't his. He chose to use the power he'd been handed rather than earn any of his own. And those choices accumulated into something as well. Just a different kind of something. I think about the version of me that stayed, that accepted the offer to return, swallowed the humiliation, and kept her head down. I understand why that version exists. She's practical, she's careful, she's afraid. I have been that person at other points in my life. But I think if I had gone back, I would have been choosing safety over truth, and the cost of that would have shown up eventually, somewhere, in some form. What this experience gave me, and I mean this without any romanticization because it was genuinely painful and disorienting, was the understanding that I had been confusing stability for security. They're not the same thing. Stability is external. Someone else controls it. Security is internal. Someone else controls it. Security is internal. It's what you carry with you when the keycard is gone. The firm I built has my name on it. Not literally. I named it after a street. But every decision made inside it is mine. Every mistake is mine to learn from. Every client who calls does so because of something I built, not something I inherited. Deacon is somewhere in Chicago now doing work more suited to what he actually earned. I hope it's going all right for him. I mean not plainly, not generously, not grudgingly, just plainly. His story is his to write from here. Mine is going exactly where I want it to go.